both to the GAP and, of course, to Sustainable Development Goals in general. We've completed the decade of education for sustainable development, and we have learned a great deal. We've learned a great deal, and we want to build upon that and move forward. And this afternoon we are going to be discussing and talking about that. The pilot projects that we developed both before and during the GAP, we now want to build up and strengthen and move from the periphery to the core. But we also have another agenda that we think is possible. We think that we can actually strengthen the quality of our education systems by engaging with the social, environmental, and economic issues that are facing our communities, our nations, and the world. Bringing that kind of realism into the education system and having our education systems truly engage with these real issues would be a way of strengthening the perception and the reality of public education, public awareness, and training programs. At the same time, we think that educators, trainers, and those engaged in NGOs and faith-based groups, those who help to inform the public, we would have a role to play in actually having the Sustainable Development Goals come true. So it would be a two-way street. Traditionally, those of us engaged in ESD are sort of an afterthought. Once nations have built their plans, they sometimes come to us. But often we're the ones still that are not integrated into these kinds of plans. And so what we want to do is to learn how to become partners, true partners, right from the very beginning. In doing that, we need to know how to talk about it, we have to know how to present ourselves, and we need to know how what we have to offer can truly be recognized and accepted as an integral part of our national plans. So this afternoon, what we want to do is to hear, first of all, about the Global Action Program. That is the sort of a formal way of engaging through UNESCO's programs, engaging with the Sustainable Development Goals. We also want to learn more about how our education systems can fit in with what ministers of education see as their priority, and that's Education 2030. There's Muscat and the agreement that came from that. There is also the agreement, the largest gathering ever of ministers of education to that date in Aichi, Nagoya, agreed to revisit the purpose of education and to look at how to embed both education for sustainable development and also the global citizenship and global education program. Now, we have an opportunity in this coming year because ministers will be trying to figure out what to do. Education systems formally will be trying to figure out what to do. And so will the various other ministries within the government, as they each need to come up with their own plans and programs. So there is an opening, and we want to be able to move in and truly become a partner in it. So to begin with, you can see we have a number of speakers. We will, each person will get about 10 minutes and to talk about their particular aspect. In some cases, it is mainly about the GAP or the commitments that their institutions have made and how they are going to go about it. But then as we move on through the program, there will be speakers who are talking in a more general way that hopefully will engage each and every one of you. Everyone has something to contribute. You all are experts and have strengths, and bringing it, whether it is to the international program, the national program, or even in your own local setting, each of them are extremely important. So to begin with, I'd like to call on someone I think you all know, Alexander Light, who is the chief of the section on ESD at UNESCO, to introduce us to the GAP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chuck, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak here. What I would do just very briefly is to sketch out the follow-up initiative to the UN Decade of ESD, the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development, and briefly provide a rationale for it. Many of you, but maybe not all of you, will be familiar with various aspects of the Global Action Program. But we thought before we go into the more specific presentations and contributions on the panel, it will be helpful to have a reminder of the framework that UNESCO provides to continue work on the UN Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, which, as you know, ended in 2014, in November, at the end of 2014. With the big World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development that Charles Hopkins just mentioned. The decade was concluded there, and ministers of education and non-governmental stakeholders together launched the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development as a follow-up to the UN Decade. How did we as UNESCO, together with our member states and the non-governmental actors that we work with, how did we come to the point that we launched the GAP? We first reviewed the UN Decade and looked at the various success stories that were running during the UN Decade, the specific policy fields, for example, where there has been a lot of progress, and the good practices that have driven education for sustainable development throughout the 10 years of the UN Decade. And we also looked at the gaps and at the various things that remained to be done at the end of the UN Decade. We published a report on the decade, which we presented at Nagoya, and you can find on our website. And on the basis of this assessment of the UN Decade, we consulted with our member states and various non-governmental actors, also of course with our UN partners, and tried to identify specific areas of education and specific target groups where particular action would be most promising for the follow-up framework to the United Nations Decade on ESD. And I'll present these 5 priority areas in a moment. Here just a few background facts as a reminder to you. The Global Action Program was developed through a consultative process with our member states, governments, and with non-governmental actors, and at the end endorsed by all member states at UNESCO's General Conference, the UNESCO General Conference, a kind of analogy to the UN General Assembly, where later on, a year later, the Global Action Program was also acknowledged, and UNESCO was asked to continue the coordination the way we have done it during the UN Decade, also for the Global Action Program on ESD. I mentioned that the GAP was launched at the end of the World Conference on ESD in Japan, where we were also able to already present a number of concrete commitments by governments and by non-governmental actors to implementing the GAP. I think by the end of the conference we had collected around 360 concrete commitments to specific activities under the GAP, and some of those organizations that made a commitment and that continue to work with us for the GAP are here on the panel as well, and will also present their contribution to the Global Action Program. The overall goal is very simply to build on the successes and challenges of the United Nations Decade, to generate and scale up action in all levels and areas of education and learning, to accelerate progress towards sustainable development. And this overall goal has been broken down into two objectives, and that's particularly interesting, I think, in the context of the agenda of this conference here. One of the objectives looks towards the education stakeholders, towards the education community, and calls upon the education community to reorient education so that everyone would have the ability to acquire the relevant knowledge, skills, values and attitudes to contribute to sustainable development. So pretty much the agenda that we have pursued during the UN decade. And the second objective does not really look towards the education community, but to all other stakeholders that are concerned with sustainable development, and calls upon them to integrate education and learning more strongly as implementation strategies into their activities. That would be pretty much all the stakeholders that are represented through various workshops here. So, for example, climate, water, oceans, consumption, cities, etc. These are often very different people from the education community, and one of our objectives of the Global Action Program is also to create better synergies between the education community, the education stakeholders and experts, and those drivers of sustainable development that are not necessarily aware of the power of education to drive or to be a driver for sustainable development goals, as the conference title says. Let me show you the 5 priority action areas of the Global Action Program. As I said, developed on the basis of an analysis of what worked and what didn't work so well during the UN decade. The first one is to advance policy, or to create the right kind of policy environment for education for sustainable development. And that again both on the side of education policies to make sure sustainable development issues are integrated education policies, but also on the side of the whole field of policies that deals with specific sustainable development issues, climate maybe as the most prominent and most recent example, and make sure that that education is integrated into those policy frameworks. The second one looks at the institutions, in particular education institutions, and tries to reform them, transform them in light of a whole institution approach that looks at learning content and methodology, but also at issues like campus management or governance of the institution, community outreach of the institution. All of that should be in line with sustainable development. There has been a particular workshop here on that topic specifically as well. The third priority looks at building the capacity of educators and trainers, because they are, I think maybe that's one of the most self-evident areas here. They are one of the key change agents when it comes to education for sustainable development. Another group of key change agents is the fourth priority action area, empowering and mobilizing youth through ESD and harnessing all the good education for sustainable development activities that are already underway and driven by young people. I'm glad we have a youth voice here as well on the panel this afternoon. The fifth priority action area looks at the local level and calls upon all the stakeholders that work at the local level, starting with local authorities, but then also private sector and NGOs working at the local level to create a learning environment for sustainable development in the community, in the city, or in the rural context. So these are the basically the target groups, and also the areas that we propose, or I need to say it even stronger, that our member states agreed upon as the follow-up priorities after the UN decade on ESD. And I think it would be very, very interesting on the panel and in subsequent discussions really to look at how can this matrix or this framework be used to drive the agenda of this conference. How can we use this matrix and how can we harness the contribution of all these actors and all these target groups to make sure that education is mobilized as a driver for each and every sustainable development goal. Before I come to the end, I'll just mention 4 implementation strategies that we as UNESCO propose and that we think can work well at the local, at the national, at the regional, and at the international level. We are using these 4 strategies at the international level to drive the momentum for Global Action Program implementation. Of course, the international level is not the only one, as was the case during the decade. Most of the action really, by far, most of the action is happening at the local and at the national level. But at the international level, we're using these 4 strategies as well, building new momentum, building on the decade and continuing and renewing the momentum of the decade. We did this very specifically by calling upon stakeholders to commit to specific activities to the Global Action Program. Second strategy, harnessing partnerships, and we do this very specifically by working with a number of key partners at the global level that help us drive, help us keep education for sustainable development visible at the local level, but also drive the implementation on the ground. Fostering a global community or fostering a community of practice, we will organize a global forum that at the global level reviews progress on the GAP. We'll do that next year in March. And we are just putting online, these days, in fact, an online sharing house on all kinds of good practices that are underway across the world on implementing the Global Action Program. And the 4th strategy is showcasing good practice that also works very, very well, of course, as you know, at the local, national, but also regional and international level. And at the international level, we are doing this very specifically by having launched a new prize with the support of the government of Japan, a UNESCO Japan prize for ESD that we awarded for the first time in November. With this, I come to the end, and I'm sure or I hope we have the time at the end of the presentations to discuss some of the issues, in particular the question, how can we use this framework to drive the agenda of this conference? Thank you very much.
As an example of a major commitment to the GAP, I'd like to call upon Torvald Jacobson, and he's the director of the Young Masters program at Lund University. This is a web-based program that reaches around, right around the world, and it's connecting youth and building understanding and cooperation about sustainability issues. Torvald?
Thank you, Chair. Very nice to be here again, Global Action Plan for UNESCO. And it's actually what we do every day. As you perhaps, I know that some of you are familiar with the program we've been running since a very long time ago at Lund University, and now recently from an independent foundation outside the university, the Young Masters Program on Sustainable Development. And the core features of that program is that we use the internet to give assignments to students all around the world. They do these assignments in their local environment. Typically, they are interacting with the community surrounding the school. They are doing field investigations. They are doing small reporting on problems or solutions that they can find in their neighborhoods. And then they upload that back to us. And we share it among the other students. We try to match students so that you get stories from the other side of the world, and you can compare your reality to the reality somewhere else. And the pedagogical idea behind that is, of course, that first of all, see local examples of global issues where you live, but also learn in a much more efficient way than you can do from a textbook what the world actually looks like. It has a much greater impact on anyone 16 years old to hear a story about poverty from someone that has done it in a poor country as compared to reading about it in a textbook. So that's the idea behind it. So when Chuck is talking about moving from the periphery to the core, I think that's exactly what our commitment is about. We want to do a few things with this new project, the goals.org, that I'm going to show a little video introduction about in a minute. We want to explore the possibilities with new technology, and especially the fact that we are going to have the first connected generation within a couple of decades. And these young people, they are coming online today by millions, and they do it through mobile phones, affordable smartphones. So we have been struggling hard to design the application to work on the cheap smartphones that you are finding right now in the poor countries around the world, because we need those voices in the global dialogue to make this work. We also want to find ways to scale up deep learning and experiential learning and skills training in the same way as you do with MOOCs. I think that MOOCs are just the first step on a way where we will transform education through a technology. And right now we are losing very many of the qualities that we have in traditional education with personal interaction and interacting with the physical world. And we move to solutions where we are interacting with the screen. But we use the technology just to give assignments that actually pushes the learners out in the surroundings and in society and find out about things for themselves. So we have, in our educations, they are online educations, but typically the learners are spending 70% of their time offline, finding out the things that we ask them to find out. And just to show you what the goals.org will do, I will show you this little video, and then I will just give a few concluding remarks.
This year, all 193 member states of the United Nations will adopt a new set of development goals to make the world more sustainable by 2030. These goals are about finding practical solutions to worldwide challenges like poverty, illiteracy, and climate change. This might sound a bit complicated, and it is, but everyone can do something, especially if we don't have to do it alone. Cheap smartphones are changing our world, and soon enough almost everyone will be online, even in the poorest of countries. The youth of today will be the first connected generation. What if we can also turn them into the first sustainable generation? There are hundreds of millions of young people around the world, and almost every single one of them is eager to understand how the world works and to make it better. We believe if they could share their ideas and what they've learned, we can build a better, more sustainable future. The Goals.org is a free, global education and learning platform that offers an open crowd learning experience to educate young people on the new Sustainable Development Goals. It connects students and teenagers from all corners of the world and can be used on even the most basic mobile devices. Here's how it works. Young people from around the world meet up at the Goals.org, where the Sustainable Development Goals have been transformed to bite-sized challenges. They sign up for a challenge, pollution related for example. Each challenge has different missions and assignments. They set out to investigate their challenge in their local areas. Their stories and discoveries are uploaded to the web through the app. The stories get feedback and are shared over the globe, inspiring other students and young people trying to solve similar challenges. A schoolgirl in Denmark sees a solution and uses it to do something in her own community. A student in Buenos Aires suggests how the solution could be improved and adapted. A scout troop in Indonesia uses that solution to help solve and complete a different challenge. Over time, better and better solutions for an increasing number of challenges are collected at the Goals.org and shared among a growing number of users. No problem is so big that it can't be solved piece by piece. Millions of small ideas can help achieve any goal, no matter how big and overwhelming it might seem at first. We already have a network of partners ready to get on board. Together, we represent more than 100 million young people. Imagine what we can do when the whole world is on board. This is how the first connected generation becomes the first sustainable generation. The Goals.org, real change.
Yes, so that's the grand vision behind the goals.org. And we launched the platform at the World Scout Jamboree in Japan in September, late in the summer of 2015. When we talk about these 100 million young people that we have in the network, the World Scouts organization is obviously the largest one of the partners that we have, but we have been working with CEE here in India for many years, and also with partners in China and elsewhere. So we have also working with the mother organization FEE, with the eco schools around the world. So altogether we have more than 100 million potential users. So the quest right now is to reach out to all of them. And what we are hoping to do when it comes to the GAP is that since we are reaching out to grassroots level schools, and we find many times change projects of excellency on that level, what we hope to do is to feed in that kind of projects and that kind of students into the flagship project that UNESCO is planning for leadership training in ESD for students and young leaders, and provide a contingency of grassroots level students from around the world to that program. That is how we think it could fit in. And otherwise, the main core business for us is to get the numbers there to reach as many as possible. It's free for everyone. It works for formal and informal learning situations, and you can try it out. We will have a school version up by September this year. Thank you.
Of a program that is international, and one of the commitments. There are hundreds of commitments made to the GAP, some of them being international, some being within national GAP programs, and some local, so on. A great example. The next speaker, Dr. Shepard Renke, is a program specialist in education at the Swedish International Center of Education for Sustainable Development, or SWEDESC. The work there covers pretty well all of Scandinavia, but also into Asia and Africa. And in particular, what Shepard is going to talk about is a program on teacher education in Southern Africa that they're working on as part of the GAP. So, Shepard?
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here to share our experiences in Southern Africa in teacher education. As Chuck has said, I work at the Swedish International Center of ESD. My role is to support the mainstreaming of environment and sustainability into teacher education. This program started in 2011. We have been working with teacher education in Southern Africa and Scandinavia for 5 years now. The strategy that we have taken was that in 2011 we came together with practicing teacher educators from Southern Africa and Sweden, and together we brainstormed on the challenges that the students in our classrooms today will face when they go into the world. For an example, one thing that came out very strongly was that we now know that we cannot provide a job for every child who is leaving high school. We now know that we cannot provide a job for every child who is leaving university or college, but we are still teaching our children as if we are going to give them a job. We are teaching college students and students in high school as if they happen to have good grades, they will get a job. And we now know that it is not true for every child. So when we did that, we then went on to look at what can we do in order to address these challenges that we have just listed, and we come up with examples, classroom examples, which respond to the challenges that are currently in the world today, so that young people, when they leave college, when they leave high school, they will not be surprised when they get into the world. So when we did that, we said, now that this is what the classroom should look like, how should we be training our teachers? So we used the examples that we developed in order to work with teacher education as a starting point in reorganizing the curriculum of teacher education especially when it comes to the methods of training teachers and also the working with the syllabus of teacher training. We started working with about 40, there were actually 42 teacher education institutions, 84 teacher education colleagues in Southern Africa and Scandinavia. And after a period of 4 years, 3 to 4 years, when the student teachers were now going into teaching practice into the schools, one example from Belvedere Teachers College, when the students teachers started going into the schools, we discovered that the student teachers had been empowered in environment and sustainability education, but the schools were not ready. The schools were still very much exam driven. As long as environment and sustainability education was not in assessment, was not being tested, the school was not interested in a teacher who is empowered to deliver in such a way. So this created a problem for us, and we came back to the drawing table to say, how can we deal with this? Our commitment in the Global Action Program was to support teacher education, but now we had this challenge that we can support teacher education, but if the product of teacher education is not relevant in the schools with the current school system, then we are going to have a problem. Then we devised another strategy to bring together the key stakeholders in the ministries of education. We assembled together 4 countries in Southern Africa, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mauritius, and Botswana. We invited 6 key stakeholders from the ministries of education. These are the chief directors in the Ministry of Education. For the first time, we managed to have the chief directors to a workshop, and they managed to stay with us for 3.5 days, and that was the first time it has ever happened. And we invited the chief directors in primary education, secondary education, teacher education, technical and vocational education, curriculum development, and also assessment. When these people came together, we realized that they brought with them their national curriculums. And we also realized that in each of these countries, they are reorganizing their national education curriculum is changing, or it is being modified. And 4 words keep coming in all 4 countries. There are 4 key words. One of them is critical thinking in the students, the other one is creative thinking, and the other one is relevance of education, and the other one was quality of education. We used this as a way of describing how education for sustainable development can help the ministries of education achieve those 4 important areas that they had cited that are cited in their national curriculum. So what we did was we brought them into the same room, and then they were discussing how these 4, with reference to education for sustainable development, can help them in achieving the aspirations of their curriculum development. So the partnership here, it was a partnership of 4 organizations: the Swedish International Center of Education for Sustainable Development, where I come from, then the SADC, Southern Africa Southern Africa Development Community, the environmental education program there was the other partner, and then UNESCO regional office in Harare. So the 3 of us came together and designed a program of supporting these ministries of education in 3 areas. We're actually combining Action Area 1, Action Area 2, but our stress was in Action Area number 3, which is capacity development for teachers and educators of ESD. So what happened at the end is we gave each of these countries a change project to go and do. They came together as individuals, that is from primary, secondary, technical education, teacher education, assessment, and curriculum development. But when they went back to their countries, they had a project to go and design change within their curriculum system to see how ESD can help them achieve quality and relevance of education, and also how they can achieve critical thinking and creative thinking in those areas. So what is happening currently is we have got 4 change projects which are taking place in those 4 countries, and that's what we will be monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Countries and their foreign aid and so on have been supportive of ESD. We'd like to move now to Japan, and I'd like to introduce Professor Osamu Abe, a fellow UNESCO chair in ESD. He's the director of the ESD Research Center there at Rikoyo University, and he is the past president of the Japanese Society of Environmental Education, and a wonderful example of how civil society in linking with public education have been major shapers of the program. So,
thank you, Chairman. So I'm very happy to have a speech with chipmunks around here. I like to talk about movement and issues in Japan in promoting ESD in the post-ESD period, and the importance of localization, SDGs, and related issues. In Japan, a civic society has played a major role because we, a civic society, are the ones who proposed UNESD. In Japan, the National Action Plan for GAP, focusing on its 5 priority areas, has finally been drafted, and it will be finalized by March this year. In this National Action Plan, there are 3 major focuses: collaboration of multi-stakeholders, integration and reflection of ESG in sustainable development policies, and promotion of ESG through sustainable community development. In order to implement these, the Japanese government is launching a national ESG support center to provide support needed by communities and to share information and experiences. This is based on our proposal from a network of NGOs, and its operation will also be done by NGOs. There are 2 important viewpoints for promoting ESG in Japan's current social conditions. First, it is how to deal with natural disasters. In other words, how to build a resilient society. Japan needs to rebuild and revitalize communities affected by Great East Japan earthquake in 2011. And also other natural disasters following. In particular, we are now experiencing more and more natural disasters, which are most likely a result of climate change. Therefore, it is an urgent task to build a resilient community, including biological adaptation. Second, rural areas in Japan are facing many unsustainability problems, partly due to falling birth rate and aging population. This is one of the major threats for Japan, which can eventually lead to unsustainability of urban area too. Unsustainability issues of rural communities include destruction of the primary industry, loss of biodiversity and local traditional knowledge and culture at the same time. We regarded ESD as a very effective way to tackle such a situation. Our government is also becoming interested in ESG approaches. SDGs and COP21 agreements are the international agenda, but these also relate very closely with the need to develop resilient and sustainable communities that I have just mentioned. In other words, this international agenda needs to be localized. I repeat, localization is critical. We need to localize SDGs and COP21 agreements through not only formal school education, but also non-formal and informal education. Based on our experiences, we are learning how important it is to integrate these three forms of education for sustainable community development or indigenous development. Japan is going ahead of any other countries in terms of decreasing and aging population in rural communities. I believe our painful experience will be valuable lesson for you all. In order to localize SDGs and COP21 agreements, we need to integrate 70 goals of SDGs into education. However, unfortunately, our government is slow in taking action. Expect Ministry of Environment. SDGs are related to the activities of broader governments and multi-stakeholders, but collaborative action is still not happening. We need something like a SDGs monitoring and information center, where civic organizations can easily access information such as good practices, so we can promote our integration of ESG and SDGs. I hope UNESCO and UN can establish such a center, closely working with the civil society. Anyway, let's move forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And sometimes unrecognized, but it was Japanese civil society that pressured the government, and the government reacted, and it was largely the Japanese government that was the leader in getting us the decade of education for sustainable development. A recognition of the impact that civil society can make. Okay, we're going to shift a little bit. One of the things that we worry about is how do we ramp up? How do we move from a pilot project to something much larger, and that itself is sustainable over time? And so our next speaker is Megan Pullone. She manages the global strategy and development for the Barefoot College. Now, the Barefoot College is community-owned, managed. It's a grassroots development, and it's in all 43 least developed countries around the world. And so we'd like to have Megan explain a little bit about how one ramps up.
Namaste. So as I've been introduced, I'm actually the CEO of Barefoot College now, which is a bit strange because it's a grassroots Indian organization now led by a non-Indian. I think nowhere in the global action plan are we more at risk than in the low-income countries. And so the lessons that Barefoot College has been implementing for the last 43 years as of this year are even increasingly more relevant in light of the 2015 SDG goals. And I think it should be a source for those of you who don't know about the college, a bit of inspiration and a bit of pride to know the power that Indian innovation at grassroots level has had in influencing today policy in many, many of the developing world countries around issues to do with sustainability and education. The college was founded on the values, the lifestyle and work style of Mahatma Gandhi, on this simple principle that we must live simply so that others may simply live. Now, Gandhi did not write just to write. He wrote to bring us to action. And that is why everything we do at the college is about concrete action and not about theory. It is the first and only college in the world built by and for the rural poor. It is fully solar electrified and has been for 18 years. It uses eco-sanitation, water and rainwater harvesting, and it is powered mainly by women. We see women as the undervalued, untapped key to all development, and nowhere are they more critical than at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals. But in looking at how to create the space and the environment for women to show what they can do, what they do naturally, the first place you have to start is by creating them as professionals and letting them see themselves as professionals through confidence, competence, and purpose. I don't know how to go back. Hang on. Sorry, technical. I don't know. The movie is gone. Go back. This is the danger of using Mac.
In the poorest villages around the world, people are looking for solutions to poverty, pollution, access to clean water, and gender inequality. But one solution has been right there before our eyes: a woman. Her voice, silenced for generations, often by her own community, where she meets a world full of new challenges and possibilities. We see her and women like her learning new technology the practical way, giving them the skills they need to become barefoot solar engineers, pioneering change. Upon returning home, she brings light that illuminates homes and powers night schools. She develops clean drinking water systems and teaches others to do the same, paving the way for a better quality of life for all. The proof: today over 1,200 villages are solar electrified in 64 countries, bringing new life to over 500,000 people, one woman at a time, one village at a time, one country at a time. The search is over. She is the solution. She is a barefoot woman, and she is our future. Being the change we would like to see in the world starts by empowering her. Share her story. Share this video and join the movement.
So this type of social innovation doesn't come by accident. It comes by really designing for impact with communities at the heart of a partnership model that then extends outward in a ripple effect to local government, national government, private sector partners, philanthropy, and multilateral organizations. And it starts with a redefinition of education. We love the quote of Alvin Toffler, who says, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write. It will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." I think that's particularly, I have no idea what's going on. It's completely gone on its own. It's okay. It's okay. I think that's particularly important as we talk about scaling really viable and meaningful solutions that we know work and have impact. We have to first start with changing mindset about knowledge transfer, about who can learn, what they can learn. This is why we chose to focus on demystifying and decentralizing technologies. And we start that at very, very early age with young girls learning traditional skills and wisdom from people within their community and learning to be teachers in their own right. And that becomes a quite viral mechanism for spreading sustainable living practices. No one lives more sustainably than grassroots people who face hardship every day. They economize everything. They think of ways to use things that we never imagined. And the problem is that their voice is so often left out of discussions around designing programs that will, in fact, address their needs. So I think my message will end there because I'm too afraid to touch another button. But I hope that there will be some questions at the end about the way we've approached this large scale. We have an extraordinary relationship with the government of India. And of all the ministries to have that with, we have that relationship with the Ministry of External Affairs, who recently has given us $4.5 million to put renewable energy in 18 of the least developed countries in Africa, and 14 of the small island states to help them fight, at grassroots level, climate change. And I think it's often our arrogance that stops us from including the very partners who can get us to scale and trying to work around people instead of doing the hard work, the time-consuming work, to bring people along with what you're doing. Thank you very much.
Partnerships and so on will continue now. If we look behind, the number of partners who have made this possible, and one of the partners that has been front and forward with the decade and now with the GAP is the Earth Charter, an extremely effective and important group. And our next speaker is Sarah Dobson, who is the Earth Charter Youth Coordinator and has quite a background for a young person. She's worked as a teacher and a facilitator in the US, in Nicaragua and Costa Rica, with youth, police, prisoners, and sex workers. And in 2011, Sarah co-founded and managed the Peace Project, an educational and environmental youth network in Nicaragua. So,
I didn't know you knew. My name is Sarah Dobson, and I'm here today on behalf of the Earth Charter International, as the coordinator of youth projects. And I'd like to begin by expressing gratitude for the invitation to come and speak. I want to express gratitude for the people that organized the conference, as well as the people that have set everything up, cooked all the delicious food, cleaned up after all of our messes. So I really appreciate all the work that went into the conference and for the opportunity to speak. As a young woman, I don't often have opportunities to speak to this many people in one space. I'm certainly not speaking representing young women. We have a lot of different perspectives, so I can only speak for my own, and I'm sure that perspective is different from a young woman from India, a young woman from a different spiritual tradition, a young woman with different abilities. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak from my own perspective and on behalf of the Earth Charter. And I'd like to talk to you a bit about our organizational commitment to GAP. So there are actually two commitments. One is an online program for educators around sustainability, but it's in Spanish and Portuguese. So today I'd like to focus on the GAP commitment with youth that I'm working on in partnership with CEE, with UNESCO, and with some other organizations. So next year, this year, 2016, which we are now in, the Earth Charter is launching an online training program for youth. And that program will begin with a 10-week course in leadership, sustainability, and ethics. And in that course, we want to provide a lot of different diverse content. And at the end, we are asking that youth do a workshop in their local communities around one of the topics from the course. And youth that complete their online training program will then be invited to become Earth Charter youth leaders. And that will be an extended opportunity to continue engaging with the youth network, to become focal points for the youth network, to engage other youth, to continue doing workshops, to create content for the youth network. And essentially it's a leadership opportunity and an opportunity to implement Earth Charter values and steps towards sustainability for young people all over the world. That commitment, the course that we are working on, we've been working on with a few other partners, and it's also something that we want to continue improving upon. And the more partnerships we have, the stronger the course can become. So I would also really invite young people, people connected to youth networks, to get in touch with us, whether to apply to participate or to participate in the transformation of this course as it develops. I also wanted to speak briefly about commitment in another way. So as an organization, this online training program is one step that we are taking as part of the Global Action Program, trying to realize youth empowerment and trying to create platforms by which youth can meaningfully participate in the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. I also believe that there's an opportunity for personal commitment, and the Earth Charter is a tool that some people have found useful as a collective framework guiding vision for how we want to live, how we want to work. And I'm just curious if people could raise their hands if they've ever heard of the Earth Charter before. Okay, so many of you have heard of the Earth Charter, and I would invite everyone that's read it and hasn't read it to take another look at it, because there's a lot of richness there, and every time I read it, I take something new away. And I think that whether we are working within an organization with youth, whether we're working on climate change, whether we're working on gender equality, that when we say that we are making a commitment to one of these goals, to really recognize how integrated each of these are. So if I say commitment to this Sustainable Development Goal, this priority action, to recognize how in the Earth Charter vision, how all of these goals are inseparable and how all these goals are interconnected. And when I'm designing my course, our course for youth empowerment, how is that content and how is that pedagogy addressing climate change? How is it addressing gender equality? How is it addressing participatory practices? And as we each are taking steps toward the goals which we might find closest to our hearts, how we can recognize how our actions are addressing and advancing, or perhaps hurting the advancement in these other areas that are also interconnected. They say that Einstein defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I think many of us do that in different ways. And we've talked a lot about needing to transform our systems and transform our economy, our education. And we're also standing up on a panel, and everyone is facing us and listening in sort of a traditional setup that we've used for many years to impart knowledge. And I think that in our personal commitment toward working toward these goals, we also can commit to doing things differently, to trying something new, and to raising up voices that haven't traditionally been heard. Just a couple examples of what that might look like. When we meet a man, a woman, and a child, do we greet each one with the same attention and care? When we invite a young person to speak, do we listen with the same recognition of legitimacy or expectation of knowledge that we might to someone that has been deemed an expert? So within each of our work and within our daily lives, how can we transform the way that we are interacting and our relationships with one another and with the natural world, as we are also advancing as organizations and as institutions? I think that this morning we covered how we know that measuring is imperfect, our indicators are imperfect, It's still important to try and to continue improving. But what we can do is agree on sort of a collective vision and make our own personal commitments and decide where we want to go and how we want to interact with one another and with the world. And the Earth Charter is one tool for doing that, but I would like to invite each person, as we're thinking about what we can do as organizations on the international, regional, and national level, also what personal commitment is necessary to recognizing new voices and to giving those value, to being willing to transform and recognize how we can advance the transformation that we're looking for. Thank you.
Continuing with the idea of diversity, Sarah pointed out that from the large government programs and national strategies right down to the role of the individual, there's that full range. So too is the next speaker. Peter D'Souza, I hope, will talk a bit about the range that is of topics or concerns that are involved in sustainability. The threats that are there, from large-scale youth unemployment to migration, etc. It isn't sort of the traditional idea of sustainability that is here within society now. So let me just say a few words about Peter. He's a professor at the Center for Studying of Developing Societies in New Delhi. And he works on issues of democratic politics and in comparative politics in South Asia. And he's worked on a range of themes from Panchayat Raj, trust and political institutions, Dalits and discrimination, and even a uniform civil code in India. So again, it's the idea of where we should be looking and who should be engaged and what really are the threats to us now from a sustainability issue.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, CE, for inviting me here. As you've just learned from the introduction, I'm neither a professional educationist nor am I a professional environmentalist. I'm a political scientist who, in a sense, tries and develops a critical conversation with both communities. And that's the location from which I'm going to speak. I'd like to begin by saying that we live in exciting times. The ideas that we've heard over the last 2 days and the ideas that have been emerging in various fora, in a sense indicate that 2016, 2015 and 2016 are perhaps important years, if not watershed years, in the history of our planet. Thinking about that, I was reading a review of a book that has just come out. It's called The World in Revolt, which talks of 1956 as one such period. 1956, in which there were a series of revolts that in a sense defined, that led to a definition of the present. There was revolts in music, there were revolts in aesthetics, there was revolts in rights, there was revolts with relation to peace. And the review refers to a speech by Martin Luther King, 1956, a 27-year-old peace rights campaigner is speaking, and he says the old order has if I quote him correctly, he says, "We stand between two worlds, the dying old and the emerging new." And King warned his audience. This is a 27-year-old. He says, "For those who fought to secure justice and freedom are up against," and this is really the starting point of what I want to say, "are up against the guardians of the status quo, who were always at hand with their oxygen tents to keep the old order alive." So I think, thinking about the ideas that have been presented over the last 2 days, if it was only a question of recognizing the various things that we can do and then leave the conference and go out into the world, would we create a better world? Would the world suddenly come into being because so many good ideas, such enlightenment thinking has been presented to us. And as a political scientist, I must introduce a note of skepticism, because I think we are up against a formidable counter-order. The ideas that we represent and the ideas that we support are up against a formidable system, which in a sense is moving the world the other way. And it is that we have to, against which we have to present our ideas. In a sense, we should see ourselves as in competition with another discourse, the dominant discourse. We must see ourselves as in competition for the minds of the young. We must see ourselves as in competition to produce an alternative aspiration, an alternative set of attitudes, so that the dominant discourse begins to feel challenged at its very foundations. It is a battle for mind space. And in that mind space, those of us who are here must recognize that we must be champions of building a counter discourse. We must speak for that counter discourse in two voices. We must speak with the specifics that we've heard. Many very interesting examples like change.org, like the Barefoot College. We must talk about these specifics. But we must also not forget that there is a big picture that has to be made, and that big picture has to stand in contrast to the big picture that today presents itself as the only way, what was referred to in an earlier plenary as the neoliberal discourse. Now, to develop that big picture, we need to do several things. And this is very important because, I really want to caution us against believing that speaking in English from a particular location in the world with good ideas and good intentions, we will have done enough. There is another world out there. There is a world of the global south that somehow doesn't have enough of a voice on such important occasions, not just here but elsewhere. So we must develop a counter discourse which must speak in two voices. It must try and forge a big picture. And it must do this by drawing on multiple cosmologies. It must do this by looking for concepts from outside the West. Looking from concepts that are not just concepts that come from what we will metaphorically call the English-speaking world, but look for concepts that are there in Latin America, in Africa, in South Asia, in Southeast Asia. We must look for alternative concepts. Gandhi, in one sense, gave us a whole menu of all such alternative concepts. The concept of trusteeship is a concept which has been under-theorized, but which in a sense represents an important nodal point for the counter discourse. So we must look for concepts. We must look for texts. There are important texts that in a sense give us the big picture. Yesterday, Ela Ben's new book was discussed, Anubandh, and she puts forward this brilliant idea which would have tremendous impact in the global south, that within a 100-mile radius of a village or a locality in the rural areas, we will be able to produce a sustainable economy for all the things that the village requires. A 100-mile radius. Unfortunately, it seems like a naive idea, and an idea which doesn't recognize that all global economies, all economies today work within a 100,000-mile radius. The 100-mile radius is an idea that needs to be explored. It's a big idea. There's another text which, in a sense, complicates the secular discourse that we have. We had a glimpse of that a parallel discourse when the learned governor talked about dharma and talked about the Indian cosmologies, which echoed the concerns of this group. But there's recently been published an encyclical called Laudato Si by the Vatican, which actually has ideas and themes that I think need to be discussed. So we need to try and understand, what does a group like us do when ideas are coming from religious cosmologies? Do we accept them? Do we debate with them? Do we reject them because they're coming from a zone that is not secular? we need to identify practices. And we've had 2 sets of practices presented on this forum, which are fascinating. You know, goals.org and Barefoot College, which can be multiplied. I mean, I recall it in conversation I had with the educationists of an experiment, and I think it was Botswana, where they were concerned about school dropout. And so they decided to give children solar lamps, so that when they went home and they didn't have electricity, they would still be able to study. But one of the incentives of the solar lamp was they had to come back to school the next day to charge the lamps. So, you know, there are such fantastic practices across the world. We need to know more about them, and we need to have our panel document them. We need institutions. We need to look for innovations. We need to, and finally, there's a third text, and I'll conclude on that note, which is produced by UNESCO. I had the good fortune of being associated with it, but that's not the reason I'm talking about it, because, you know, over the last 2 days, lots of texts have been presented to you. But this is intended to be a big picture text. It's a slim volume. It's called Rethinking Education Towards a Global Common Good. And the value of the text is what it does is it challenges the direction in which education is moving right across the world. It says that education today is increasingly being seen as a private good. We must restore its understanding as a common good, not just as a common good, as a global common good. And that is the direction in which we can go. So I've just mentioned 3 texts, Ilaben's book, Laudato Si, and the UNESCO document. But there are many such texts, and there are many more that I hope in the coming days and weeks this congregation will make available to us through the various internet sites that have been mentioned. And through that, I hope we will be able to generate a counter-discourse. The counter-discourse is necessary. There are no luxuries available to us, and the counter-discourse has to be in terms of the big picture. Only then will the dominant discourse begin to take us seriously. Thank you.
Continuing with the idea of the diversity and range that ESD covers, I'd like to introduce Professor Hela Lotsiska. Hela is a professor in education and holds the Murray and Roberts Chair in Environmental Education at Rhodes University in South Africa. She has contributed to national and international policy on environmental ed and ESD, and received numerous awards and recognition. She's the editor of the South African Journal of Environmental Education. One of the things that we have learned both through environmental education and ESD, etc., is a greater insight into pedagogy and how people learn and ways of knowing, and both finding new ways and rediscovering old ways. And I'll turn it over to Hela.
Thank you very much, Chuck. And if I could just echo the thanks to the CEE, to Kartikaya and his team. It's just fantastic to be back here again. I think this is my 3rd time in the last 10 years, so it's wonderful to be back. Alexander started the session with the idea of presenting the gap to you, and I thought I would end the session with the idea of traversing the gap, because we want to traverse this gap, and traverse is a really nice word because it's about traveling and moving and, you know, doing something and being serious about it. So I tried to find a word that would bring commitment and traveling and movement together. So I thought I'd talk about traversing the gap. And I think the only way that we can traverse the gap, well, I think I'm learning, you have to stand very still here, is to really look and take very seriously the concept of transformative learning. And it's a word that is often bandied about, and I think often, or very often, quite poorly understood. And I'm so happy that Peter just presented before me and all these wonderful examples of good practice and the ethics that Sarah brought in, because I think all of that comes to the fore in transformative learning. And all I really wanted to do was raise a few things about it, because it's only a few minutes, and of course this is a much longer topic and project that can take us many years to discuss. So I wanted to start with the kind of key idea here that if we want to be talking about transformative learning, we have to look at the issues of aspirations and critique, and I think Peter has raised that now too. The SDGs for me look a bit like aspirations. They kind of formalized, policy captured aspirations which we're all trying to look at and think, okay, what must we do about these now? How are we going to work towards these? But I think we can't just do that. We also have to think about them a little bit critically. And as I was preparing for coming here, I thought about now who, on my bookshelf, I have a very big bookshelf, who is a person that really inspires me and that encapsulates transformative thinking, transformative learning, transformative practice, and a really strong commitment to what I would call real sustainability. And I thought of Vandana Shiva. I met her a number of years ago at one of the World Social Forums. And she's a fantastic woman, very inspirational. And I just thought I'd bring her perspective to the opening of this presentation. And what she does is she provides a very strong argument in her work for a paradigm shift to earth-centered politics and economics that takes full account of all voices and people's struggles for land, water, biodiversity and livelihood in the face of what she calls growing eco-apartheid. And she's also called this a war against the planet. She says that we are actually at war in this very destructive relationship that we are in terms of the planet, which has this massively difficult effects on the world's most marginalized people. So what she talks about in her work also, which I'm also very happy to see coming up in the UNESCO book that Peter talked about, was this idea of the commons. And she talks about the reclaiming, democratic reclaiming of the commons. Now, the question that I have, and that's why I want the aspiration and the critique to be living close together, is is there enough strength in these sustainable development goals for this kind of an aspiration of a democratic reclaiming of the commons? And it's been interesting to me as I've been sitting at this conference and just listening to the many times in which people have talked about we have to revisit philosophy of education, revisit philosophy of how we think about life. And we also have to use this in rethinking the purpose of education. I'm on a very unstable platform here. But some of the things that we heard yesterday morning was we've got to put the last first. We have to look at social justice, fairness, inclusivity, the polluter pays principle that seems to have disappeared off the horizon under the expansion of neoliberal appropriations of sustainable development. The precautionary principle has also all but died. Protecting the commons, that's our air and the water that we are dependent on. Mindfulness was discussed in the Guppe's workshop the other afternoon. And I think all of these are key to understanding the full meaning of transformative learning. And we can't launch transformative learning unless we develop these perspectives. And this is big picture work, I think, as Peter also said. The second one that I wanted to talk about was knowledge when we talk about transformative learning. And if we look at the history of knowledge in education, it is based on what De Souza Santos talks about. He talks about it as what he calls it abyssal thinking in this particular book of his, which is a book on epistemologies of the South. And the subtitle there is Justice Against Epistemicide. And what he says is that abyssal thinking is a kind of thinking which distinguishes, and then it normalizes, and then it privileges some forms of knowledge. And in that same process, it excludes and it devalues other forms of knowledge, and it then renders them effectively invisible. So we don't see the knowledges of our societies in our education systems. We see a very sanitized, selected, particular form of knowledge in our education systems, and then we train teachers to reproduce that. So this is a very critical issue if we're thinking about transformative education. And he goes so far as to describe this problem as what he calls epistemicide. And he says that that's a major cognitive justice issue, and it's also a huge waste of human potential. And I think this is very, very insightful. a huge waste of human potential if we can't work with the knowledges that people have. And we're only using a small portion of the knowledge that's available to us on this planet. A huge waste of human potential. And in response, and this is what I like so much about this book, is in response he actually gives us a way of dealing with the problem. He doesn't only critique, he says, let's cultivate radical co-presence. Let's understand each other. Let's cultivate that. Let's be conscious about it. And then let's create these rich, what he calls ecologies of knowledges in our educational work. And I think that's such a lovely idea. It's such a great invitation for transforming education and learning. Then I want to just talk a little bit very quickly about transformative learning and some of the things that we know about it already and some of the things that we don't know and some of the things that we should probably put a lot of effort into finding out. And we know that transformative learning is very closely linked to motives, values and interests. We know that it ought to be or often is humanistic, dialogical, it's deliberative. Paulo Freire brought that to our attention. We also know that it involves creativity and reimagining. It's also agency-centered and it's linked to collective social learning. And I think that we need to do much more work in these two areas, which is to look at transformative learning and how it can transgress the norm, and then also how it can actually build social movement in much stronger ways. So I think we can do some more work in that area. And then I think we have to look quite critically and carefully at our best available knowledge of transformative learning if we do want to traverse the gap. And one of the interesting, I've just brought out two little interesting points here that I think give an example of what we might want to do, is that critical literacy was at the heart of the emancipatory pedagogy of Paulo Freire, and that drove education as a dialogical process of intersubjective learning-led change, which is a very powerful concept and of course was very powerful, as we know from the history of Paulo Freire's work. But what we've seen in recent times is a loss of critical literacy in emancipatory educational work as we started to develop all kinds of participatory methods and then turn these into technologies of practice. So I think we have to do some returning work to some of the essences of some of these ideas. There's also new work emerging, and I would look at this under the framework of various expansive learning models that are being developed. And what they do is they do something very interesting. They promote the relationship between what they call first order, second order and third order learning. And that really just means learning which is acquisition of knowledge, learning as meaning making, and then learning as reflexive social change. And now I've lost my presentation again. And my kind of question is if we can see all of this in what we know about transformative learning, can we translate that into better ways of doing educational work? So I'm quite interested in the global.org, because I think they're developing a pedagogy there which is actually developing reflexive pedagogy for collective social movement and collective social action. And I think if we can give more attention to that, and particularly in ICT-based learning. My last slide is really on the issue of measurement and transgression. I think measurement has been discussed here today. I've put 2-3 points there. Just the question of, can we actually measure this kind of learning, transformative, transgressive learning? And if so, how are we going to do that? It's not going to be business as usual with tick boxes and indicators and such. It'll have to be something different. And then I think we also need to remember that what can't be measured still exists. And I was reminded by this photograph here of these two children, which I took last time when I was in India, watching small children helping each other to learn water quality monitoring. And I was reminded about the teacher, what the teacher was doing, and these children and how they were working together. And I just thought, now how can you measure the importance of the smile or the passion of a good teacher or the kindness and the collaboration amongst children? And I think my final word is that we shouldn't lose these important qualities of transformative learning and education as we look at questions of measurement. So thank you very much. Thank you for that chance.
Thank you, Hela. And thank you to all the presenters. We've been able to get through the largest panel yet, and with time for questions. So I greatly appreciate everyone's effort. So We are open for questions and or comments, but please keep them brief, just a matter of 30 seconds maximum. We'll take questions. We'll take maybe 4 or 5, and if you have a particular person that you would like to have answered, then we'll take note of that. But for the other comments, what we'll do is take the questions, and then we'll ask the panel, whoever wants to respond to any one of the questions, or both, and we'll work it that way. I think that way we will get through the greatest range. So, hands up. Okay, so we'll go here to this lady first, straight down here, and then we'll come over.
Good evening to all. I'll again introduce myself. I'm Amrita Diman. I'm come from Development Management Institute, that is in Bihar. My question is, since yesterday and today I've been hearing about a lot many innovation.
If someone on the panel would take that on. Yeah, we're going to, yeah, no, just to sort of make note. Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panel. Betsan Martin from New Zealand. I'm very interested in this massive online learning and the global reach and the global promise of the education courses that you're outlining. I'm also thinking about what happens to local schools and what accountabilities are there to, to local education, and what is this doing to local requirements for teacher education and so on. And with these massive figures of 100 million people, with children and so on, what about teaching in the languages, the very diverse languages? And also, is there an accreditation process? So I'm sort of asking questions about this globalized education, which is very transboundary, and what commitments are there to sustaining local education initiatives and all those questions in between. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Way in the back, there are 2 hands. I see. Yes.
My name is Farida Wahidi, and I work with City Montessori School in Lucknow. Currently, I look at youth empowerment and capacity building. In my earlier years of work, I was very much promoting this discourse of alternative paradigm in development that was being promoted by the Institute for Studies in Global Prosperity. Now, the Institute today in India is really looking at building the capacity of the young minds at the university levels. My question is to you, Professor Peter de Souza. I wanted to ask you that in your presentation, which was to me truly remarkable, you addressed this whole issue of the twin processes of disintegration and integration that we are facing and we are seeing in the world today. You said that it was important and necessary for us to generate a robust counter-discourse in order to be addressing the forces of disintegration that are very, very prominent in our society today. I would like to request you to elaborate on that. What are the ways by which we can move ahead in that direction?
Okay, thank you. Now over, there's a lady in pink, yeah, can we, okay. Yes, okay, go with the gentleman at the back, then over here to the lady in pink.
Thank you so much. I'm Saranj. And my question was, I mean, there has been across the panel, this whole issue of higher education, and there's a whole example of how it is done through online training, and then the whole lesson is learned offline, which is a great method. But so far, if we look at how higher education has worked, it has largely worked to feed the industry, whether we look at engineering, medicine, or science-based R&D work, all of that. And that has generated employment, jobs. As was also acknowledged by the panel, that job creation is going to become more difficult. The very nature of the way sustainable development and the whole discourse around it works, it hints at more volunteerism, it hints at more sharing economies, it hints at ways of finding where sustainable production and consumption methods can be implemented. That quite a lot questions the whole capitalistic approach through which we have been generating jobs, and that is where the relevance and the question of the courses which are there online, learning offline, these how will they help in job creation, or is that not a concern anymore?
Thank you. Yes, in there.
Hello, my name is Jolene Belford. I am a student from Central Queensland University in Queensland, Australia. I am currently studying my third year of a Bachelor of Primary Education. My question is, how can pre-service teachers and educators best prepare themselves for the changes that need to be made in education, especially in younger children approximately 6 to 12 years of age? Because I feel that we are focusing on early childhood and we're focusing on youth, but we tend to forget that middle years where, you know, children are still impressionable and still need to have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions down in the front half of the... We'll take 2 more questions and then we'll go across the panel to try and address them.
Good evening, everyone. This is Fawzia from Aligarh University. My question is that we all here are from affluent societies and we do represent the affluent class. How can we bring those people who are away from the term sustainability and they are actually very close to sustainable development? Thank you. I have made the question clear. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a gentleman down in here. Oh, we'll get you, and then that'll be it. One at the back and then over here.
Hi, my name is Vijay Reddy. I work in the UK at the business school. Just an observation, I feel that there's a large gap exists in relation to HE, in relation to higher education, as well as the ESD initiatives. I'm aware of the Global Compact and other initiatives. I just wanted to have more information about what initiatives the UN agencies are taking in order to close the gap between the HE as well as the ESD initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. And there was a gentleman down here with a white shirt and black hat. If we can...
Hi, I'm Satyanarayana. I'm doing MA in Good Governance and Public Policy from Sri Sri University, Odisha. My question is related to agriculture. So we have discussed more about sustainable development goals, and we doesn't discuss much about the effect of agriculture because of the climate change, how to face, because food is the essential for every living being. Okay, so food habits has to be changed, which requires behavioral change also. To achieve this, we have many good world practices across all the religions, across all the cultures. Why don't we have a look at back and take some leaves of those good world practices and implement towards the sustainable development goals? Thank you.
Okay. Well, what we'll do now is we'll I'll warn you, Peter, since you were asked up front, and then Sarah and Torvald, if you would perhaps want to comment on the questions around the MOOC, and then we'll see if there's anyone else on the panel who would like to respond to the other issues. So, Peter, over to you.
Thank you for the specific question directed to me, as well as the other questions directed to the panel. As I said, I spoke as a political scientist, and counter to this, it has to be done at all these levels, whether we are talking of it in terms of suggestion, or subtle suggestion, the subliminal level, whether we are talking of it at the level of law, whether we are talking of it at the level, I think the slide that Hela presented of the epistemologies of the South takes the debate to the epistemic level. We need to counter this at multiple levels. This is a difficult task because most of our knowledge producing institutions work in the service of the other side. I mean, let's not, in fact, it's even more, if I may appear even more despondent, trustees. At the moment you're a trustee, you do not have the right to do with those resources what you would do if you were an owner. It is in trust with you. Of course you will be rewarded for the wealth that you produce as a result of that control. But that wealth, only a portion belongs to you and the rest belongs to the community. So here is an idea that is available to us for inhabitation. Similarly texts, similarly practices, similarly icons. Let's look for people in the global south who in a sense have other ways. In the Ecuador, in our UNESCO report, we talk of the idea of, which comes from Sumakawe, which comes from the Andes region, where the people of that region show the interconnectedness between the human and the natural, and produce an entire changed perspective of this relationship. So we need to look for such ideas. I believe they are there. I mean, I've just had a glimpse of them in my very occasional conversations. But there is a network of such organizations. Boaventura Sousa Santos, in a sense, represents that, where we are trying to document and disseminate these alternative knowledge systems.
Which was quite the goals.org specific. How do we deal with local circumstances? How do we deal with a lot of the infrastructure that we have in schools already? Yes, this is questions that we all are raising right now. We are exploring possibilities that what can you do with the new technology if you want to create a two-way communication learning process that is different from the one-way communication that we have had traditionally in education. And that means, of course, that we challenge a lot of practices and also even behaviors that we connect so closely to education that we almost think that it is education. But if we step back from everything we have learned about education and try to unlearn most of it, you can see that education basically is a process where a person steps into this process, and the promise is that when you step out, you're elevated in one way or another, you know more. That's the basic concept. And given the possibilities we have today, we can arrange that in many different ways. So if we try to translate what we do in the goals.org and in the YMP, you can say that in the goals.org, the normative element there is the SDGs. There is a legitimacy for us to have a course on the SDGs because they have been decided on the highest political level. And then the online structure is more a system to make the exchange possible. But the beautiful part of it is that the textbook, the real power of the educational system, so to say, is co-created by the learners in real time, based on real stories from the local level. And that's where I think the answer to your question comes in. I think this kind of system actually recognizes local experiences and local examples with much less filters than the traditional textbook is doing. So that is one answer. But then, when it comes to accreditation, it comes to teachers in the local setting, and you talk about languages, etc. These are all things that are in the making. Right now, the course is only in English. It will be in 8 languages eventually. But of course, it will not be available in all languages around the world. But as a part of the setup, we ask the students to interact with students all around the world, and they need to have some kind of common platform for that. And we can do machine translating to a certain point, but we cannot meet all languages. So if you want to talk about global sustainability directly with people on the other side of the world, you need to find a language where you can meet. And that could be English, it could be Spanish, but it couldn't be perhaps your native language if it's very small, like Swedish, for instance. So.
I think it's really important for us all to understand the practicality of some of the things that have been sort of conveyed. And this is really about mindset shift. And it's about the fact that there is no silver bullet that is going to work at every level of this challenge. We have 1.6 billion people in the world without access to a light, let alone electricity, let alone connectivity. And we have 800 to 900 million illiterate people in the world, of whom 80% are women, who will raise 7.3 billion children. So the approach must be one of recognizing a duality of approaches, which is a very non-colonial idea. It must be a human-centric approach, and it must be flexible. And so we must accept that there are different types of relevant knowledge for different communities, however we define community. And it's this viral that we need to look at. How do we go viral with different relevant curriculums that will target different parts of the population so that we are bringing everybody along in different ways?
I think Megan touched on some of what I was thinking, in just that I think everyone's in agreement that the formal education system needs a lot of transformation, and that transforming formal systems is hard and takes time. So these are also, I think, methods that can meet some of the urgency of our crisis while we're working on transforming these systems that will take more time to integrate into national curriculums and training programs for educators, and these can complement the more urgent issues, and that they're not meant to really replace formal education, because there is also something special that happens when a group of students are sitting together in a room. And just, I think that also sort of connects to the question about how can educators prepare themselves. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take time for the formal system to prepare educators to teach for sustainability and in a transformative way, and that there are some innovative programs now and open source and free online programs for educators with tools and resources and curriculums available, so that while the formal system is catching up, they can have some tools to work into their classrooms as well.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Alexander, do you have anything that you would like to add?
I can just, I think there was one very concrete question about higher education, how to reduce the gap between higher education and ESD. And just to I know we are at the end of the panel, but just to very briefly respond that there are indeed a couple of UN initiatives that try to reduce this gap. One is run by our colleagues from UNEP, who are here, the Global University Partnership on Environment and Sustainability, that tries to integrate sustainability in, I think at the moment, over 800 universities. And another example is an initiative initiated by UNEP, UNESCO, and a number of other UN partners, where we asked before the Rio +20 conference, asked university leaders to sign up to a declaration where they committed to integrate sustainable development across the whole spectrum of the university as an institution, into teaching and learning, into campus management, into the governance, and they also committed to reporting on their initiatives. I think it was around 500 university presidents that signed up to this initiative. The number is not so high, it's a drop in the ocean, of course, but the interesting thing was that we have some evidence that really led to some real change in those universities. It was shared in a particular workshop during the conference here, that the simple commitment from university presidents then led to a number of universities integrate their sustainability into their regular reporting exercise, and that again led to a number of initiatives regarding organizational change in the institution. So it's just two quick examples in order to respond that there are indeed a couple of initiatives underway. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Alexander. There's a real tight turnaround. There'll be an announcement in a moment, so I'm going to draw this to a close on time, because we just had 1 hour for dinner and so on. But let me close by saying that Megan put some reality out there for us. And it sort of proves that no one group, no one subject, no one approach can do it. It's going to be a plethora, a number of approaches by various people that will help to move forward. And I hope that this panel has shown the tremendous range in the commitments and the opening for people to become engaged. The range of the scale from government and national plans right down to, as Sarah pointed out, the individual. We each have a commitment that we can make. The range of the content and what really encompasses the threats to a sustainable future. The range of approaches in pedagogy, ways of learning and unlearning. So certainly there is room for all of us, and I hope that challenge, as you are sitting there thinking of what will be your own commitment, that will help us all move forward. So my thanks to the panel, and I hope you will join me in thanking the panel for a wonderful. An announcement. Just hold for 1 minute, please.
The teacher education workshop is at room 4.5, and it will begin at 7:30. There is a group which is working on drafting the recommendations in room 17. Anyone who wants to join can join at 7:30.
Just to add to this, that room 17, we have some of us are working on the recommendations, which we are planning to send all of you, whose emails you got, which is all of you, and you will have a chance to see it tomorrow morning and comment on it, and we would hope that the summary, the detailed recommendations will take some time to put together, but a summary may be of 2 pages. If you all have a look and comment, then this tomorrow afternoon in the final plenary, we can formally say this is what, in fact, we do want to convey. Thank you.